fifth round of ARGO Open. I hope you all have a good debate today. I presume everyone has consented to do the stream. As you know, this is one of the stream rooms. Excellent. In that case, without any further ado, would like to call on the Prime Minister to open the case of
Prime Minister. Sorry, guys.
In a country, meaning that now decisions that are taken at the national level by officials and politicians that represent the government are going to be taken by counties and by local administrations. We're going to show you that this kind of system is counterproductive in creating representation for the people, and B, leads to poor management of resources and economic development in most countries. But more on definitions. We say that this system in general means that some things that are administered by the government, for instance public schools, are now going to be administered by counties. Counties are going to receive a fixed amount of money, and they're going to have as much autonomy as possible in deciding how to allocate that money according to their needs. Furthermore, we tell you that the system of grassroots democracy implies that as much decisions as possible are taken by a local referendum. So people go and vote on a specific issue, and the result of that referendum is binding for the local authority. As such, the people can take the decision that affect them directly. I'm going to show you in 3 arguments that this is counterproductive. Firstly, that it leads to less representation of the people's will. Secondly, it is not efficient in administrating a country in general. And my second speaker is going to show you how we create tensions between regions. So my first argument, grassroots democracy implies less representation for a number of different reasons. It implies that we have increased use of referenda, meaning that people are called to polls to cast ballots more often. This leads to a phenomenon called voter fatigue. Individuals don't have the time nor the interest to participate that much in the political process. They don't want to get out of the house every Sunday and cast a ballot on a specific issue. This is why they delegate their support to politicians, and this is why they vote for politicians once every 4 years, because they don't want to do it weekly. We say that it is problematic because when you have voters fatigue, few people are voting. And when few people are voting, those few people don't represent the will of all the people, of the majority of the people, but only their will. And this leads to underrepresentation, and this is not democratic in the second, sir, because these people are self-interested. When we vote for a politician, chances are that the turnout is going to be much higher, thus more people are going to vote that politician, and that politician is going to represent more people than the decision taken by a referendum by few people who decide to turn out. Go ahead.
Factually incorrect. Switzerland is the country with the highest number of referendums in Europe. They are also the country with the highest representation and highest voter turnout on those referendums. How do they explain that the only example in Europe with this system goes against their case?
Okay, so Switzerland is a great place to live, right? Switzerland is a great country. I would be very grateful to have been born in Switzerland. But in Romania, people tend to be very poor, or not really poor, but they need jobs in order to survive. So this leads to my second subpoint in this argument. People don't have time to participate. For instance, if that referendum is, during your work time, you cannot go and vote. Furthermore, if you're not informed, you cannot go and vote because a vote that is not informed is not representative of your will. People are likely not to get informed for a number of different reasons. Firstly, because the level of education people have in countries such as Romania or Slovenia tends not to be that good, so to be able to make very specific and technical decisions when it comes to administrative bodies. But furthermore, we tell you that people don't have the practical time to get informed because, as I said, they have jobs, they have families, they have leisure activities, and so on. And these decisions require a very high degree of information. Because when there is a referendum to build a new road in your county, that can have multiple effects. And the decision on building that road is influenced by knowing the particularities of each economic zone in that county or the cost associated to building that road. There are a lot of things to take into consideration and a lot of data to dig after. Essentially, you don't have time to get informed, and if you vote, your vote is not fully informed. This is why we should delegate that authority to politicians who are basically employed by the people to take these decisions for them, because the people acknowledge the fact that you don't have the time to do this. But furthermore, we tell the council members, exactly because they have time to get proficient on these matters, they tend to be proficient. In most instances, no thank you, those who administer counties tend to have superior studies in administration or economics. This is a phenomenon that tends to happen because this is why people tend to go in those colleges, because after you get out of that college, you tend to get a job in an administrative body. In administrative bodies such as local councils, you also have specialists who are specialized in economics or infrastructure, and they can advise the politicians directly when taking these decisions. No thank you, sir. So I have proven you that the direct democracy is not efficient in creating representation nor good outcomes. Now, on my second point, a decentralized system is not effective in administering a country. Why? Firstly, because a country is made out of many counties. When these counties are going to have more autonomy, what happens is that each county is going to take those actions that benefit itself. And this is problematic. Why? Because it prevents the government from having a coherent strategy of development. For instance, you have some counties that right now are really focused on agriculture. For them, it would make sense, for instance, to diversify themselves. But for the country, it doesn't make that much sense, because the country wants to have counties that are specialized on certain industries. So on a system, with a system of grassroots democracies, what happens is that the county might tend to choose to diverse its economy, which in turn, for the country in general, for the bigger country, it's detrimental because it no longer has the same level of specialization and the same level of efficiency when producing products. This is specifically problematic in a second, sir. Specifically problematic because countries need to have this coherent approach to development. Yes?
The only country with such a radical direct democracy system is China, that has such a representation system. And they don't have problems with the diversification of counties. Furthermore, they're over-radicalizing and telling them,
Yeah, it's pretty weird that in a debate about direct democracy you're bringing the example of China, because the last time I checked, China wasn't really democratic, but was one of the most undemocratic countries in the world. But back to my point. On a second layer, we tell you that in principle it's problematic to allow counties to make decisions on their own, because this affects other counties as well. It is undemocratic to put some people vote, and the result of that vote is going to affect other people which are not consulted. For instance, if a county chooses to make more public schools, this is going to affect the neighboring counties, because this is going to attract families from other counties to that county who has made that school. And we say this is problematic exactly because you allow a body to take its decisions, and that decision is going to affect other bodies as well, and those bodies are not consulted because theoretically it's not their job what the county does. When it comes to a system of centralized democracy, the government takes into account what the county that wants to build the school wants and what the neighboring counties want as well. And we say this is more representative because those in the government were voted and are representing both of the counties. And for all these reasons, because it's more representative and it's more effective, we say it's less effective and less representative, we don't support the system.
Thank you very much for your speech, and to open the case for the opposition, I invite the speaker here.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable panel, let's talk about democracy. Democracy is a great system, we all agree with that, but modern times require some systems to enhance our democracy. The truth is, we need to clarify this debate because we have a huge problem. The opposition presented a case against strong local democracy and that is in contradiction with central democracy, plus a direct democracy with referendums against a representative democracy. This is not what this debate is about. They missed it. This debate is about grassroots democracy, which is a completely different phenomenon. Grassroots democracy is a system where the standard representative democracy is enhanced and supported by a huge group of grassroots movements, such as Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, and so on, that help support and enhance the political system. This is what is commonly defined as grassroots democracy, and this is the only reasonable ground to have this debate upon. So let's examine what's going to happen in this way. Firstly, we're going to argue about checks and balances that such a system, such an enhanced system produces. And we're going to analyze this on two levels. Secondly, in our second argument, we're going to address a problem that they also represent, which is the problem of inaccessible areas to a big central government that such grassroots movements can access better. And thirdly, we're going to talk about a new way of political participation that such systems cannot provide. Now, let's get into it. First argument. Grassroots democracy movements provide checks and balances for a mainstream political system. Two levels. Level number one, they expose anomalies and systemic political system is setting correct anomalies that example movements, systemic discrimination, racism, sexism, and so on. We have grassroots movements that have emerged, Black Lives Matter movement of new economy, and help mainstream politics deal with this. Now, as they gather recognition and become they become important in the main and to reflect. For example, legal proof that Hillary Clinton's current political campaign has already decided to engage in talks with Black Lives Matter, and they have direct influence on the mainstream political system. So this kind of a system can provide incredibly strong support system. Internal mainstream political system repeat the current system. So because political systems and structures their own functioning because they can access more and more power within it. And such movements can, as an outside force that is independent and completely decentralized, right? Such movements don't have a central leadership. Because of that, they're capable of strong influence on such system and critique that is impossible within what they propose. Second point of the first argument is that they provide not only a destructive and aggressive attack on problems, but provide a support in mainstream politics, such as a counterweight to corporate control of politics. We've seen this in the recent American election, where something unprecedented happened. A candidate that was completely sponsored by crowdfunding, Bernie Sanders, entered the political sphere and gained massive support. It is not yet there, but this is a fine example of how grassroots movements are a thing and an important force in shaping the political system. This is important because in our current political systems, we largely have strong lobbies and strong economic forces completely controlling the mainstream politics. This is a way for small groups, such as minorities, to have a strong impact on politics by grouping together and forming those movements that can bring up new ideas and contribute them to the political system. They provide coverage of candidates, even if they're rejected by the mainstream, and therefore enhance our democracy by making sure that it is democratic, that actual people have a say, even in economic affairs, or even in ways that we're currently really hard to access, right? And they also provide an organized system for people to connect together and bring ideas forward, which in their system cannot really access, but more on this in the second speech. Now, furthermore, we have to address the second argument, which is really important, because it's directly clashes with the and reach and address low level everyday that it deals with issues, right? But on a lot of problems, such as or economic problems or local environmental protection, is often neglected. And because of that, just a second. Yeah. And because of that, this kind of system can provide real support. Let me give you a clear example. In Slovenia, we had a movement, Let's Clean Slovenia. It's a grassroots movement that emerged as a disorganized group that finally they connected to the entire country. This is the kind of but this kind of movement at a level of integrity in such problems tackle specific issues such as marginalized groups, right? Black Lives Matter, for example, or feminist movements of such sort, because they can provide minority support, because minorities generally are in all their areas disenfranchised because they're in the minority. But when they connect together on a nationwide level in such movements, they finally get an opportunity to make a real.
Do you think such movements have any checks and balances?
Yes, such movements have an important system of checks and balances. The checks and balances of such movements is simply crowd control, in a sense that the crowd that is a part of the movement itself propagates ideas really important to them. People really care about them. Those movements have a very specific element, which is those are everyday normal people. They say everyday normal people don't have time to engage in such system. That's false. Because we obviously see those movements emerging. If what they're saying and their view would be true, we wouldn't see such a rise of those movements, right? We have real life examples of this happening, so they can't say it won't happen because of a theoretical reason if we have a practical happening going on in the world. Because of all that, those movements provide best ideas rising to the top and provide relevant ideas to actual people. And this is the core of the issue. Systems surpass mainstream or classic democracy. Democracy is classic democracy that is enhanced and supported by people themselves. So it's a return to true democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, and I would like to move to the proposition called by the Deputy Prime Minister. You're here.
We're basically debating a system that works. Today we believe that the opposition has totally missed the debate, because we're not talking about the legitimacy or the efficiency of a social movement. We're talking about democratic system today. We're talking about a way of engaging with your electorate as a politician, and with the way of engaging you as a population with your electorate. We believe this should be the debate today, and we should be talking about democratic system, not about movements that are not anyway mutually exclusive with this democratic movement. So with that in mind, I'm going to have a few points of rebuttal on their case, and then more response to you, and then my their first two arguments only and that grassroots movement. Yeah, sure. First of all, that they were not in the motion because, well, we're not debating the efficiency of those. But we believe that even if it was, they're not efficient. They're not efficient anyway. Why? Because first of all, they do not have a head, and they do not have a clear purpose. You do have clear purposes in maybe the first week of the movement, but then we see that they are deorganized because, well, they do not have a clear ideology in mind, and people are just getting out on the streets. This is not a sustainable way of holding people accountable. Which gets me to my second point of the rebuttal on those. Because in a particular moment in which a movement, let's say it gets some visibility, in that particular moment, in many cases it shifts the initial burden, and we believe that because nobody can keep them accountable, because they're empowered by the street, by the people. Nobody can hold accountable the principle that they are upholding today. We believe they're highly inefficient. But about that third argument, about the one that actually was in the motion, about that grassroots democracy might tackle better the idea of low-level problems. First of all, we believe that people are not going to engage into this particular problem solving. Why? Because they are not fully informed in order for them to get into solving this. Because saying that you are voting on a problem, it gets you implied in that particular problem, and it's enough to get you informed, is realistic. Why? Because you're not only going to be asked if you want a road to be built, you need to be informed on what the cost of that particular roads are making. You need to be informed about the specific funds that your So your specific county is going to need to access to build that particular part of infrastructure, for example. So we believe that people are not going to be prone to inform themselves in that particular matter, or even if they would be, the number of those proactive people that are going to get engaged into that particular matter isn't going to be very big. Why is that very problematic? Because it's not representative, because it defeats the initial purpose of grassroots democracy. Because in this particular moment, in this particular moment, what we do is that we rely on the fact that politicians have expertise. It's the duty that we put our trust into our states, and this is a thing that can be held accountable. We cannot rely on people informing themselves and making the right decision for them to be represented.
If you take a look at average education of politicians in Europe, you see that in the majority of countries it's the same as the general population, or in some countries such as Spain, Greece and Italy, even lower. So, without factual piece of information, how can they still claim the politicians can decide?
First of all, not true. These people are mostly from academic environments. But even if the politicians are the toughest people in the world, they still have commissions around them that are there to inform them, are there to advise them, are there to make sure that the rhetoric and that the demands of the people are implemented correctly. We believe this is the way in which you gather the most efficient way in order for a change to be made. We believe that information is more correct and is more specifically targeted to solve problems in our model. Okay, now more points of reconstruction on the first speaker's case, because he has told you in the second argument that has never been tackled, that in a representative democracy system, what you do is that you allow politicians to have better global decisions. In the particular moment in which countries have more independence for them, in that particular moment, people from a different county are going to be affected by the decision of others. How that works? Because in the particular moment in which, for instance, I say we should make a particular road in a county, you're going to affect your nearby other county by impeding them to take similar measures, because the infrastructure has to suffer on a global level. Why is that problematic? Because you, as an affected county, you do not give your consent for that. But the comparative level on this debate in our model is that the state protects you in this particular matter. Why? Because there are some compromises that you are going to make as a county in our model as well. But the fact that the state has to make sure that every county is treated as equally as possible is the protection that we need today. So we see that on a comparative level, in our model, there are less possibilities of counties getting better and better advantages, to the ones of nearby. Now, getting into my own extension, we believe that territories in countries are not homogeneous. Territories are different, and people have different backgrounds. Regarding, first of all, the industries that are developed in these particular areas. For instance, in parts of some countries you have agriculture, in other parts you have more developed industries. Second of all, you have cultural backgrounds such as linguistic. Why these different interests are bad is that you give them more power in order for them to be different and not be a homogeneous mass that can integrate in a global issue. But before going more into that,
can you give me a real life example to prove that what you're saying actually exists in the real world? And secondly, if what you're saying is different than local direct democracies, why are you given a different name?
Yeah, because you have, for instance, social enclaves and minorities in other countries. We have parts in that particular moment. What you do is that you implement bad. But the problem is that you get to fuel the country has inside of it. Why you can't work between the particular state? You are going to based on reliance. The state, what it does here is that representative democracy, that is need to solve issues and to keep a better balanced country. So global view is more desirable than more individual motion.
for your speech, and now I call on the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue.
So, what is the motion that we have come here today to debate? We have come to debate whether or not we regret, whether or not we basically regret grassroots democracy. Have they done more harm than good? What does this motion imply? It implies that the rise of grassroots democracy is a prevalent thing that is happening in the world today. What are they debating? What they are debating is not whether or not they have done any harm or done any good. What they're debating is whether or not we should instill direct democracy and whether or not we should instill local government in Romania. These are two different things. So, now let's see. The only two examples that we offer them that are anything similar to the system they're debating, they happily refuse, which are China and Switzerland. So let's ask ourselves, what are they debating? They're debating a fictional system in fictional examples and the theoretical merits of it. The motion is about an actual thing that's concretely supposed to have happened and what the effects of this were. One thing we do agree on though, that grassroots democracies are more about the man lower down. Except that our picture of how these grassroots democracies look in the real world today is different from theirs. They're not structurally different from the kind of political systems we have. We still have representative democracy, no thank you. The difference is that people at the bottom do get to make decisions. We do have local decisions, we do have, no thank you, minority decisions, and this is done through grassroots movement, which provide a mechanism which augments classical democracy and renders it to be more efficient. Okay, how am I going to structure my speech? In the following way. I'm going to first negate their argument brought up by the second speaker, present some general rebuttal to the case, and present our third argument, which is about a new wave of political participation, and how political participation shifts, and which is directly in clash with their first and partly their second argument. So, first of all, no thank you. They talk about different interests, and here they have very strange contradiction. On one hand, they talk about how local groups are good at protecting minorities if they're in local groups. On the other hand, they want to integrate them, they want to have big government. They don't want to decide for themselves. They want to have the government, they want to have an upper thing make decisions for them. This is strange, I don't know why they're arguing this. But what are we essentially talking about here? They're talking about fueling conflicts. Now let's look at, for example, a black ghetto in America, where there's a lot of African American people who are suffering forcefully by having through regular political means that are required to have the help of grassroots democracy to either point them out because they're too local for a politician somewhere in Washington to figure out, or either because they are of a structural nature and they require actions of individuals all over, which also grassroots movement can achieve. And with grassroots movement, they can get a voice. This allows them to get a voice about their problems, help solve some of them, and take the rest up to the political class, take the rest through, and help the rest of these problems be put through, established so that Hillary Clinton will listen to Black Lives Matter supporters, and that they do get a voice in the political mainstream. So we see that this is, again, so this is why our alternative is better to theirs. In their world, they would force these people without first having their own voice to solve the problem, or indeed problems solved. Clear? Let us move on to the negating the things they have said. But first of all, regarding their second argument, how it's not affecting administering a country, they talk about how we're talking about a better global decentralized way of deciding. Well, the problem is that if you only decide on the global level, like we would have in certain other would have without grassroots systems, then certain local issues do not get tackled. Why? Because they simply do not get noticed. We agree that there is a place for global decisions to be made. We believe that Black Lives Matter should be invited to the discussion and they should have their own word. No, thank you. In fact, if we compare their system to ours is the system in which local issues are addressed on the local scale and are taken up to the global scale to be addressed. Also, no, thank you. Also, we're talking about. Okay. So also now to rebuild our case. Firstly, also they're talking about how these things have no clear ideology and no checks and balances. Let's ask ourselves in this world really what they look like. Does Black Lives Matter not have a clear ideology? They have several ideas about how to deal with a certain system, but they have a very clear structure, which is that they have no structure. Think of them as the free markets of political discussion. What happens is everybody's opinion goes in, everybody participates directly, contributes to the discussion, not using random politicians, and this means that we are in a sense guaranteed to get the best group outcome. The issues that are most important and most pressing to most will be put forth. They are regulated in fact, by the fact that if one of these movements like Black Lives Matter says something unpopular, there will be a huge popular outcry. Why? Because they integrate the general population, they integrate those people that don't vote in the voting system, those that are politically apathetic, which is a big problem in society today, and these people will make sure that this keeps on track. Alright. Also they say, alright, now to move on to what they said about our argument about, no thank you, about low-level problems. How this helps solve low-level problems, local problems that before we had radicalized these grassroots movements like Black Lives Matter and Clean Slovenia, ecological groups standing behind it. What did we have? How we would not be able to tackle these specific issues of specific minorities. They would not get a voice and much popular notice because there would not be a big voting bloc without being able to garner enough support and enough allies. And second of all, we would not be talking about local issues that are very localized in a geographic sense. Now they say politicians are smarter, politicians better decide this because they have advisors. But how much do politicians actually get to know about this and how much are they actually interested? First of all, we argue that politicians do not get enough IQ, do not have these relevant issues put up to them. Second of all, we believe that politicians that are elected are generally not politicians that care about these problems. Why? Because these problems without grassroots movements, previously, before we had grassroots movements, did not have enough of a voice, people of these minorities, to be able to contribute to the election of a politician who would actually care about it because he was part of his platform. Now that we have grassroots movements, we are able to integrate all of society into these problems and stir enough of a commotion so the minority, the local minority that cares more about a problem, can have a disproportionate majority that is just affected. And these would be those from other counties, whether or not to move to the county. Some people are more apathetic. Now, to move on to my argument about new wave political participation. What does augmentation of the classical political system with grassroots movements actually represent? First of all, we have this free market structure. It guarantees the ideas you get through perfectly represent you. I've already explained this to some detail, but the actual structure itself is superior in and of it guarantees a better decision with the voices it has. Second of all, ideas come from the bottom down through conversation. We've already argued this, but how exactly? Let's think. How do grassroots movement garner people to be interested in political things, the apathetic voter that otherwise are not? Because now we have social media, talking through social media. We have people who are reached in far corners of our country that otherwise would not be reached. Far corners mean they're very isolated from the rest of society. Also, what we have is people are more likely to participate. Why? Because they have direct form of participation. Anyone can go on a Black Lives Matter forum, state their opinion, go to a rally. One vote, you're just choosing a place they not have an actual expansive voice within the system. Sure, a vote is an okay system, but it needs to be augmented by this. And what does this all go to? What it does, it helps the most vulnerable groups to get interest in the political system and help solve their problems. The young, the minorities, and certain interest groups that would otherwise be excluded. So, we have proved to you that we are actually talking about what we have defined grassroots systems as, that they help, that they have checks and balances and provide good alternative to corporate support. They help solve low-level problems better, they help solve high-level problems better, they help solve minority problems better. And why would we think they have done more harm?
Thank you very much for your speech, and we move back to the government and have a discussion.
It's pretty obvious that this debate is very, very confusing. So my main purpose in this speech is to re-clarify everything and tell you on what exactly you should judge this debate. First contention. We are talking about grassroots democracies, not about grassroots groups, because grassroots groups are things that are non-politically affiliated with the government in any single way. What we are talking about is the system that India has implemented. India has given more power to local regions, and they have more of a say in administrating themselves rather than the centralized government. So this is basically what this debate should boil down to. What is the most efficient? They don't have these grassroots level movements where people vote directly on those issues and rather are the ones that directly dictate what is going on. So this is what it should boil down to. Because what team opposition would rather have on the debate is whether or not it's good that people form groups and have similar opinions. It's impossible to argue against the fact that people should not form groups, people should not have ideas, and people should not take a political stance. We cannot argue against that because it's impossible to do that. But leaving all that aside, What I'm trying to prove to you is that our side better represents the will of the people. And that is going to be my first clash. The second clash is where I'm going to discuss how exactly these people are going to become more implicated into the political system. And lastly, I'm also going to address their whole point about backlash and conflict and whether or not local issues are going to be discussed. So entering the first point, we have told you that regular individuals have rather busy lives because they have to get jobs, because they have to take care of their families. That's why if you give that much power to the local authority and you constantly ask them what they want and what they should do and you push them to vote, there will come some point where they will not want to get money politicians. Even if politicians, so because their job getting regulations and that can help make this decision. And when you vote random, you do not give your consent. And even if you have a higher turnout rate, maybe those people are not voting in their interest because they don't really know what they are voting for. So you do not get a better representation. You only get the tyranny of the majority that is actually politically implicated and actually knows what it's reading. So that's why we believe that at the end of the day, we are the ones that are giving people more power. Another point that they never responded to was why this is wrong from a principle point of view. Because when you give so much power to a local administration that is in connection with other administrations, they might have conflicted interests. And if I vote for something that is going to affect other people and they have not given this consent, this is morally wrong. Because if something is only morally justified if it can become a norm and it can be good in all situations, and we believe that this is detrimental, this point goes to us. Lastly, they have told, in this clash, they have told us that local issues do not get discussed because we don't have the incentives to do this, because politicians don't listen to individuals. But this begs the question, who exactly elects those politicians? It is the people that elect politicians, obviously. And because people are the ones that elect politicians, local politicians must take into account, at least to a certain degree, the needs of that population, of that local community. Because if I want to become the mayor of town X, I have to know what town X wants in order to cater to the needs of its constituents. So we believe that in our system, when people vote for politicians, that is the moment when also politicians look after their needs. Because at the end of the day, even if we still have some problems, even if we still have corruptions, we still have a system of checks and balances. You have petitions, you have ways of interacting with those politicians, and we can do that exactly in our system. Now entering the second point about backlash and conflict. And they move more. The national ads started simultaneously in many other regions. But this movement is not something that fundamentally changes the way a country is run. It's something to change perception. It's something to draw attention to the fact that there is police brutality in that country. We're not going to change the way your country is run. We're not going to change anything systematically in your country. So those movements do not count at the end of the day. And I have already explained to you why it is impossible to argue against the formation of these movements exactly when they are a response to something that is naturally happening in your country. But the second type of movements, the movements like Clean Slovenia. Those movements are not mutually exclusive with what we're proposing, because you can still have a centralized government and have movements like Clean Slovenia. Those things can coexist, and we are telling you that if they want to argue for the existence of grassroots movements, they have to discuss how much power you're giving to the people. Because right now in this system, when you have movements like Clean Slovenia, it's still a movement that does not affect the way that county is run. I'll take you in a second, and it does not change the way that politicians interact with their hierarchy.
This debate is not about mutual exclusivity. It's not a choice between different systems. We're just analyzing whether or not those movements were a change for good or bad. Can you read the motion, please?
Well, I think that's offensive one. But second of all, we have already explained to you that grassroots movements are not grassroots democracies. Grassroots democracy are the kinds of systems where you give more power to local authorities rather than to centralized system. So that is the debate we're having, because it is, again, impossible to argue against the creation of some movements that are natural to the response that is happening inside of your country. Now, entering my last point about backlash and conflict, and they have told us, and the only point where they touch the motion, they said to us, you do not recognize that these problems exist because politicians are out of touch with what is happening right now. The question again that we're begging is, what exactly do you do after you give these people a voice? Because yes, you form into a group, let's say that you become more politically active, and then what? Because that is what we're discussing. Should the politicians take these kinds of decisions, or should people constantly be called towards making these decisions? And what we have told you is that when having elections and you're having people to take decisions so often, there are going to be become disinterested. That is why we have elections 1 in 4 years, because people have time to get informed. People have time to get informed about the issues that matter to them, and people don't feel like they're constantly being asked for things that don't really matter to them. Because although I may live in a city, I do not care about every single aspect that is going on in the city. And people have time to be informed where they feel like the decision matters. And the decisions matters only if they are informed and if they make the decision and have time to think between these decisions. So that's why we believe that on the comparative, we are the thing that provides more to the people. So breaking everything down, at the end of the day, we still recognize that problems exist in our system and our system is not perfect. But on the comparative, people are better represented by politicians because they were the ones that voted for these politicians, and politicians can better inform their will. First of all. Second of all, we see that we are increasing participation and they are decreasing it in their world because people are going to suffer from apathy and from political fatigue. And lastly, we are telling you that local issues do get discussed better in our world because people have an incentive to talk to politicians, and politicians have an incentive to get re-elected, so they have to listen to the will of their constituents. So at the end of the day, because actually we were the ones that read the motion, you have to vote for proposition.
Thank you very much for your speech, and for the last constructive speech, this made a call from the opposition vote.
So to start with the final speech of side opposition, let me first of all ask the question, what's the motion? The motion reads, this House believes that grassroots democracy has done more harms than good. Which means that we should not be debating a theoretical, hypothetical future case, a future system. We should rather be analyzing cases and examples of where this has been happening in the previous times. And we were the only team actually showing you examples, showing you different examples of how this is implemented. The only example that they brought to the table was in the final speech where they brought India. India is a federation, which means that provinces in India, which are so large that they could account for a country in Europe, have their own government, but that is not called or a federation because the country is half a continent big. So what is a grassroots movement, first of all? A grassroots movement, first of all, does not inherently mean a local matter, and have the chance to voice their opinion, that individuals can group together in a free, cohesive unit and thus further their political power. And grassroots democracy is a situation in which such movements enter the political systems. And we were very vocal and brought you examples of where this happened. We explained to you how grassroots democracy means that Bernie Sanders was able to get from zero to hero with the help of unions, of workers, with the help of grassroots movements, which is the way of how grassroots movements enter democracy. So just to clear what we should really debate. This debate is not a debate about them saying that grassroots democracy is disbanding the big government. This debate is not a debate about referendums. This is a debate talking about those specific groups that we have been seeing in the recent history. Before I go on to reconstructing our case, I shall deal with all the material that they brought to the table, because even though it's not connected to the motion, it is still wrong and not in touch with reality. First of all, let me talk about voters' fatigue and how people are not going to be interested in politics. Now, they have a very simple line of analysis here. They say that people don't have time, and people are not informed, and that they're not going to turn up. We say, you know what, in Switzerland, they do actually. They have the highest turnout, even though they have the highest amount of referendums. But they say, okay, Switzerland is very much different from Romania. Okay, that's not that true. People in Romania still have as much as time as people in Switzerland. People in Romania have faster internet, for God's sake, which makes the point about less information not that relevant. They cannot just throw our example off by saying that other countries are different, because we have only one example of how this has worked, and this example was a good example. Second big point that they talk about is how in the radicalized world, where there's not going to be a big government anymore, there's going to be conflicts of interest, and how this is going against the principle. Basically, they're arguing, they're saying that if a decision to another county, we're going to force them to do that as well, which is in some way going against their rights. If we are voting for what happens in our county and they're voting for what happens in their county, we are not infringing on anyone's rights. And what they're describing is basically how different states interact with each other in international relations. And we are saying, telling you that this debate is not about the disbandment or keeping the big government. This debate is about how we can make sure that it's better. The final point that they had was the point with that contradiction, the point that they didn't quite reveal it in the last speech, where they basically said that if we disband the big government, all the different people who have different opinions are not going to be able to be integrated together, but are going to be able to do whatever they want, which I don't think is a bad thing, and even they considered that in their second speech. But now let's talk about what we talked to you, the benefits that we got from grassroots movements, and especially from grassroots movements entering the democratic system, participating in it. The first argument that we had was exactly the question of why does our system currently need grassroots democracy? Why do we need to enhance our current system? We had two levels are not talked about on a nationwide level. If there was no Black Lives Matter, chances are that Hillary Clinton and Trump would not talk about racial problems all that much, because it would not be brought to such an attention. The same goes for social issues and social injustices connected to feminism. Grassroots democracy, with people entering the democratic system in that way, make sure that the political mainstream politics accept and acknowledge the problems that different people have. Which basically means that if we're talking about information, this system is much better for information, because the grassroots democracy is the reason why there is so much debate, discussion, and all the things going on, causes such as Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, 99 versus 1%, things like that. The second point, where grassroots movements even more directly enter the system, where grassroots democracy becomes an even clearer, more direct thing, was the example of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders did not have support, and it was very hard for him to gain support in a country, in a party that went against him. But he was able to gain because the people, the definition of grassroots, on the very lowest level, which means like the unions, workers, simple people like that, donated and gave funds to his campaign, which made sure that he was able to campaign. So, basically, why do we need grassroots democracy? Because politicians cannot do such checks and balances on themselves. They cannot perform that on themselves. They're not able to find all those problems on themselves. Which is why we need a free movement without a clear system or an ideology, such as for what just among grassroots democracy stands, to be able to correct those.
So you're essentially arguing for democratic checks and balances that are inherent to democracy. How do you expect us to say that this does more harm than good?
You could talk. I'm not going to run a prop case for side proposition. I do have a prop case that I can show to them because we prepared for both sides. And yes, there are some drawbacks with Black Lives Matter as well, but you should have talked about them. Okay, second point that we had was the point about local problems that are inaccessible to the big government. So the big government cannot always access local problems, such as local environment problems, such as problems is not to do that. The President of the United States, he does not have the time or the funds or the staff to cover every damn problem, which is why we need grassroots movements, which is why we need people cooperating together, talking about what's the problem, talking about what there is to change, which is how there's more information in the system, which is how then you get more people to vote and cooperate, because people get informed about local problems, people care about local problems, and people spread the information about local problems. And grassroots democracy is a system that promotes just that. And the final point, the point that's probably the most important point here, the point that they didn't refute enough, was the point that Arthur brings in our third argument, which is basically the next explanation of how you get more people to participate with grassroots democracy. Exactly when you have the internet, talking on forums, people talking on Facebook, sharing videos, links, articles, things like that. People get more information. When you have the most apathetic groups, such as young people or different interest groups like the Greens, when you have those people less active than you had before. To summarize our case, we think that our system of democracy right now has some flaws. People are not involved in it enough. And if we we are quite happy that people are starting to cooperate, starting to talk about the system, starting to crowdfund people in the system, starting to discuss, get together, and be the real change in our political system. Because of all those reasons, we oppose the motion. In no world do we regret progressive democracy.
Thank you very much for your speech, and we say on the opposition side you have the opportunity by here.
Dear panel, let's examine what happened in this debate. Firstly, let's look at clashes and problems. First, great problem was, of course, with the motion and how we understood it. Here we have to examine certain things. Firstly, the division between local and central government and grassroots democracies versus lack of grassroots democracy, or more specifically, harms and benefits that those movements existing in the real world brought. This is the real division of this debate. They talked about local versus central. Our question here to you, dear panel, is if this was the debate that we should be talking about, why wasn't that in the motion? A simple Wikipedia search can tell you that grassroots democracy is different than a local central disparity. And we really are sad that they were so unresponsive. But anyway, we have to understand that grassroots movements are a new phenomenon. And they are severely different because the distinction between direct and representative democracy, which is the second real issue in this debate, is not a black and white matter. They try to represent that combination of those two levels. It's a system that allows local and minority groups to come out and help central government. This was not a debate about one or the other. It was a debate, does the inclusion of grassroots elements into mainstream democracy, forming grassroots democracy, produce harms and benefits? Now, they're actually arguing for status quo. I think at the end of the debate, this has to be stated again. They're actually irrelevant because they state a question of how should the government be structured, and they talk about should we have more local or more central power. But this is really irrelevant because if this is the biggest problem we have, or the biggest problem we have is competition between municipalities and counties for school children. The problems they presented were really small and irrelevant for a government. What we brought is a myriad of real-life, relevant, current problems, such as systemic anomalies and systemic problems inherent to the political systems, such as political systems forming certain lack of specific issues that politics that are only human cannot deal with, because the central government and the local government are not specifically made to deal with such issues. They're made to run an entire country. And this is a system that helps them deal with them. This is how we produce good effects of grassroots democracy. This is how we effect. Now, furthermore, we have more issues that we have exposed. None of them were answered. Just lacked the ability to promote candidates that are not supported by capital and mainstream. Not a single word was spoken. We repeated this, asked them, how is this help solved? How do you help solve those issues? They solved none of the issues we presented. We're the opposition. We present problems in the current system and in the current situation. They resolve their problems. How is apathy? Our third argument, an inability to raise ideas. Their entire point here was people are apathetic and they won't contribute. And we have grassroots movements contributing right now. They say people are uninformed, but don't show us real-life examples of how people are uninformed or how people don't contribute, while we have serious effects already showing from people being informed and people participating, and grassroots informed and more participating. Again, another issue that was not tackled by their side. It's really hard because they debate government redistribution instead of a harms and benefits of a new system, right? So I ask again, what exactly was provided by the government? Because grassroots democracy is essentially about benefits that main governments can have from a new and emerging system in the real world. So we believe this debate has been more relevant on the side of opposition.
Okay, thank you very much. And now for the final slides.
ARGO Open is a really cool tournament because we have this mobile application that, besides other things, also has a list of motions. And the motion reads, this house believes that grassroots democracy does more harm than good. So, the motion is not that we regret grassroots democracies, we shouldn't assess something that happened in the past, but rather take this concept and see whether or not it would be desirable to have a system designed based on this concept. So the motion is whether or not we should have a system, a political system, that is designed in such a way to give more decisional authority to the lowest geographic and social level of organization. Should we give more of the decisional autonomy to counties? This is what the motion reads, and it's quite a shame that Slovenia missed the motion given the fact that we have this wonderful app. So essentially the motion is not about federalization either, because they ask of that in the no, the motion is that we should have counties, not states, counties that are rather small communities should have more decisional autonomy than they have right now. Right now they have very few decisional decisions that they can take, and these decisions are taken rather by representative democracy, by politicians, and not with direct vote. And we have to show you that this system is a design system to design your political and administrative system. So why their motion couldn't be valid? Inherently because their principle was that we should have and we shouldn't regret those concepts that allow us to hold politicians accountable. Essentially telling us that democratic checks and balances do more good than harm. Yes, obviously, because they're an inherent part of democracy is commonly good. The problem with their case is that interpretation brought would have been incidental and not inherent. Could have been about Black Lives Matter and Occupy. Essentially, they expected us to have multiple debates about what are the specific harms that Black Lives Matter create, what are the specific harms that Occupy create, and this is not grassroots democracy, it's about having 4 or 5 debates in the same room. Please, we should have had an engagement about the concept rather than about incidental harms that each movement has created. But finally, this debate had some level of engagement between the two teams, fortunately, about the ability of people to get involved in politics. Essentially, they responded to our point about how people cannot be that involved in the decision-making process because they tend to be not enough informed and tend to be apathetic. On the point of apathy, they have responded to us throughout the bench that if people get involved in social movements, then it's obvious that they can be enough politically active so to make their own decisions directly as often as possible. And we have responded to that by telling you that most individuals are A, in need to work. They don't have time to go and occupy Wall Street because they have to work. Secondly, we tell you that those individuals that participate in Occupy Wall Street, for instance, tend to be more politically active than the ordinary citizen. This is something that we have responded. And finally, we told you that in those cases in which it actually works, such as Switzerland, there are systemic differences such as the conditions of living that allow individuals to be more politically active and more involved. As such, the good system that is productive is that of politicians. Politicians that have an incentive to cater and represent the population, and B, they have enough time that even if they don't have a qualification, a degree in administration, they have time to get proficient on those matters. Because if they don't get proficient, it defeats their purpose and they don't get elected. And because basically we were the side that read the motion, we win.